It all began with a bridge, a small wooden bridge that connected my family's lake cabin to the hiking trail on the other side. My late father built it with his own hands in 1987, plank by plank, over the shallow end of Clearwater Lake. It wasn't grand or fancy, just a simple crossing, but to me, it was the heart of everything. Every memory I had of him lived there. Fishing lessons, late-night campfires, and the echo of his laughter bouncing across the still water. 4 years, no one cared about that bridge. The Homeowners Association, the HOA, didn't even exist back then. But when they bought out the land around the lake and turned it into the Clearwater Lakeside Resort community, everything changed. What used to be peaceful country turned into a playground for luxury cars, fake smiles, and HOA rules thicker than a city phone book. At first, I didn't care. My cabin sat on the far west end, technically outside their resort zone, though they didn't like that. My father's property line stretched right up to the water's edge, including the small dam that kept the lake full. It wasn't much, just a reinforced concrete gate with a crankwheel to control the flow, but it was ours. We maintained it for decades. Without it, the lake would drop by almost 10 feet. The HOA knew that too. One spring morning, I woke up to the sound of chainsaws. I looked out my window and froze. 4 men in bright orange vests were tearing down my father's bridge. Boards split, dust flew, and the sound of cracking timber echoed across the lake like gunfire. I rushed out barefoot, yelling, "Hey! What the hell do you think you're doing?" A tall man in a gray polo shirt turned toward me, clipboard in hand. "Sir, this structure violates HOA safety standards. It's not up to code. That bridge isn't even on your property." I shouted, "You have no right." He smirked, lowering his sunglasses. "The board decided it's a liability." "You're welcome." My blood boiled. "Who's the board?" He didn't answer, just waved to his workers. Another plank snapped, falling into the water with a hollow splash. I stormed straight to the HOA office that same afternoon. The place looked more like a luxury spa than a community office. Marble floors, glass walls, fake smiles at every desk. A woman at reception looked me up and down like I didn't belong there. "Can I help you?" she asked, tone dripping with condescension. "Yeah, you can tell me who authorized tearing down my bridge." Her smile never faltered. "That would be Mr. Douglas, our HOA president. Do you have an appointment?" Did he have an appointment before sending men onto my property? I snapped. Moments later, Douglas appeared, slick suit, gold watch, fake tan. The kind of man who measured power in square footage. He extended a hand I refused to shake. "I assume you're Mr. Hayes," he said coolly. "Your bridge was a safety concern. We received multiple complaints from residents. It's been there 40 years. No one's ever been hurt." "Well, now no one ever will," he said, smiling faintly. I could feel my hands shaking. "You crossed my line, Douglas. That bridge was on my father's land." He shrugged. "Then I suggest you check your deeds again. Boundaries change, Mr. Hayes. People change." That sentence echoed in my head all night. When I checked my property file, my worst fear came true. The HOA had quietly redrawn the boundary map through a local zoning update. My land by the bridge? Gone. They'd eaten it up like termites. It wasn't just disrespect. It was theft. For weeks, I filed complaints, hired a lawyer, sent letters. Nothing worked. The HOA stonewalled everything. Meanwhile, they began construction of a new luxury dock exactly where my bridge used to be. Shiny boats, neon lights, loud parties, all on my father's water. By summer, the lake I loved had become a circus of jet skis and drunken laughter. And I had to listen to it every night. Then came the final straw. One morning, a heavy machinery crew rolled onto my property again. This time, they were working near the small dam, my dam. I ran down, waving my arms. "Get that thing off my land." One of them shouted over the engine. "Orders from the HOA. We're reinforcing the structure for safety." That's when I lost it. You touched that gate, and I swear. But it was too late. They had already welded a Clearwater HOA maintenance plaque onto the dam wall, as if it belonged to them now. That night, I sat alone on my porch, watching the reflection of resort lights shimmer on the water. My father's voice echoed in my mind, "Never let anyone steal what you built with your own hands." Something inside me snapped. If they wanted control of the lake, they could have it, or what was left of it. Because I still had the keys to that dam. 4 days after that night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind off the water reminded me of what they'd taken. The bridge wasn't just wood and nails, it was my father's legacy, my childhood, my peace. And now it was gone, replaced by plastic champagne cups and the thump of club music echoing across the water. The HOA's new dock glowed in the dark like a wound, neon strips reflecting off the surface, party lights flickering until dawn. I could see them from my porch, the same people who tore down my bridge, now laughing, drinking, and treating the lake like their private playground. The lake my father built. One night, I walked down to the dam. The moon was high, silver ripples dancing over the surface. The control gate stood solid, the same one my father had reinforced decades ago. I ran my fingers along the old crank handle, still greased, still ready. In my hand, I held the original key, the same one Dad had trusted me with when I turned 18. "You're the keeper of the water now," he'd said. "Use it wisely." And I had. Until now. The idea was just a whisper at first, a what if? What if the HOA saw what this lake really was without the dam keeping it full? What if they understood who truly owned the power? But revenge is a slow burn. I didn't want to just flood their party, I wanted them to feel it. So I started planning. I spent days walking the shoreline, noting every pipe, every drain, every weak point. The resort had built a massive lakeside pool, a spa deck, and new rental cabins right up to the waterline, all relying on one thing, the lake's level staying high. I visited the county archives again, pretending to be checking maintenance records. The original documents still listed me as the legal custodian of the dam's operation, since the HOA's acquisition papers hadn't covered that part of the property. That was my loophole. They took my bridge illegally. I was about to give them a lesson in legal vengeance. But first, I needed an excuse. A week later, I wrote a polite email to the HOA, to the Clearwater Lakeside Board. Please be advised that the dam structure requires emergency maintenance due to stress cracks and shifting sediment. I will be performing standard drainage operations for inspection purposes. Expect minor water level reduction over the next few days. They never replied. Why would they? To them, I was just the old guy with the cabin. That silence was all the permission I needed. The drain begins. It was a humid Friday night. The resort was packed, music, laughter, and the smell of barbecue drifting across the water. I waited until just past midnight, when the noise died down and only the faint glow of lights remained on the far shore. Then I went to the dam. The crank handle was stiff at first. The metal moaned, protesting years of disuse. I leaned into it, the veins in my arms straining, sweat rolling down my back. The wheel turned half a rotation, then another. I heard a deep groan from below as the floodgates loosened. The sound of rushing water followed, low at first, then building, echoing through the valley like distant thunder. The lake began to bleed. I stayed there for an hour, watching the moonlight shimmer on the slowly descending surface. Inch by inch, the waterline dropped. The current hissed through the concrete channel below, snaking toward the river downstream. By morning, it was already noticeable. The dock's lower steps were exposed. The resort staff scrambled, confused, calling engineers and shouting across walkie-talkies. I sat on my porch, sipping coffee, pretending to be just as surprised. By the second day, panic had spread. Boats sat crooked on the muddy banks. The spa deck tilted awkwardly as the supporting water level fell. Jet skis couldn't even launch anymore. I overheard one of the workers saying, "If it drops another foot, the resort can't operate." That night, I smiled for the first time in months. The HOA fights back. Of course, Douglas wasn't going to sit quietly. On the third morning, a convoy of trucks pulled up near my cabin. HOA officials, lawyers, and one county inspector climbed out, all dressed like they were attending a golf tournament. Douglas led the charge, red-faced and furious. "You opened the dam, didn't you?" I shrugged. "I sent you an email. Didn't you read it? You're destroying community property," he barked. I stood, calm as the water behind me. Community property? Funny, I checked the county records. That dam's still listed under Hayes Estate. Always has been. His jaw tightened. "You'll be hearing from our attorneys." "You already are," I said, handing him a folder. Inside were printed copies of the legal documents proving my rights over the structure, and a formal notice stating the dam would remain under maintenance until further notice. He ripped the paper in half. "You're playing a dangerous game, Hayes." "No," I said quietly, stepping closer. "You started the game. I'm just finishing it." They left, but I knew it wasn't over. That evening, I saw them setting up cameras and temporary pumps near the lake, trying to refill it from a nearby creek. Useless. The dam's outflow was stronger than anything they could pour in. The water kept falling, faster now, as I loosened the gate another full turn. By the fifth day, Clearwater Lake was no longer clear. Mud banks stretched for yards, fish flopped helplessly near the shore, and the once beautiful resort looked like a stranded carnival in a wasteland. The $1.8 million lakeside paradise had turned into a cracked basin of broken docks and half-sunken dreams. The breaking point. I expected Douglas to show up again, but instead, a sheriff's deputy came knocking. "Mr. Hayes," he said politely, "we've had some complaints from the HOA. They're claiming you intentionally sabotaged community infrastructure." I sighed, showing him the same papers I'd given Douglas. "All legal. I sent official notice. Just routine maintenance." He looked embarrassed, scanning the documents. "Looks that way, sir. I'll file the report. Just keep things peaceful, all right?" "Always," I said, smiling faintly. That night, the air was thick and still. The water had dropped nearly 7 feet. I could walk halfway across the old lake bed now, mud squishing under my boots. The dock lay tilted, lights dark, speakers silent. Not a single boat moved. I stopped near the middle of the lake and looked back toward my cabin. Small, quiet, defiant. Behind it, the dam continued to rumble softly, steady and relentless. Then I looked toward the resort, the once bright buildings now dull, windows reflecting emptiness. They'd built their empire on water they didn't own. And now the water was gone. The storm. Just as I thought it was over, nature decided to add its own twist. 3 days later, dark clouds rolled in from the mountains. Thunder boomed, and by evening, rain hammered the valley like a drum. The dry lakebed turned slick and unstable. The HOA's pumps couldn't handle the runoff. Their repairs turned into chaos as floodwater mixed with mud and debris, destroying what was left of the dock. I watched from my porch as the storm raged, the irony almost poetic. The same people who'd accused me of safety hazards now watched their $1 million resort crumble under the very forces they tried to control. By morning, the storm had passed. The lake was half filled again, but dirty, unstable, and useless. Their foundations were wrecked, their investments ruined. The Clearwater Lakeside Resort was finished. I sat by the dam, exhausted but strangely peaceful. My father's voice echoed again. Some bridges connect hearts. Others, they destroy. Theirs had destroyed mine, so I drained theirs. The storm left the valley eerily quiet. Where there had once been music and laughter, there was now silence, heavy and hollow, like the pause after a funeral. The once glittering Clearwater Lake lay half empty, streaked with mud, dead fish, and broken pieces of the HOA's expensive dreams. I walked down to the shoreline that morning, boots sinking into the wet earth. The air smelled of rain and rot. Across the barren lakebed, I could see the resort, shattered docks, cracked spa pools, boats lying like skeletons in the sludge. Their bright banners hung limp in the cold breeze. I'd won. At least, that's what I thought. The investigation. 2 weeks later, the county sent an inspection team. Douglas had filed every complaint possible: environmental sabotage, community endangerment, even terrorism against property. But bureaucracy moves slower than water. When the inspectors came, I met them at the dam with all my paperwork in hand. The lead inspector, an older woman with sharp eyes, spent hours going through every bolt, gauge, and record. I stood by quietly, answering her questions. Finally, she looked up from her clipboard. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "you followed every protocol. Maintenance notice, safety justification, ownership verification. Legally speaking, this dam and the lake remain under your control." Douglas, who had come along hoping to intimidate me, turned pale. "You can't be serious," he blurted out. "He destroyed our resort." She gave him a cold look. "Actually, sir, it appears your resort was built too close to the waterline, violating county setback laws. Had the dam overflowed during a storm, your structures would have been wiped out. Mr. Hayes may have prevented that." Douglas stared at her, speechless. For the first time in months, I smiled, not out of spite, but relief. The truth was out. I hadn't just destroyed their greed, I'd exposed it. But deep inside, I knew I wasn't completely innocent. Revenge had driven me, not justice. And revenge always leaves something broken behind. The price of revenge. That night, I sat by the fire with an old photo album. My father stood in one of the pictures, holding a fishing rod, smiling beside the bridge that was now gone. The light of the flames danced across his face in the photo. "What would you think of me now, Dad?" I whispered. "I didn't protect it. I destroyed it just like they did." The room was quiet except for the crackling fire. Then I heard a faint creak outside, the sound of wood shifting in the wind. I stepped onto the porch. The water had begun to rise again from the storm runoff, inching closer to the remains of where the bridge once stood. And in that rising water, for just a moment, I saw the reflection of that old bridge, clear as day, stretching across the lake like it used to. It was as if the water itself remembered. That was when I decided I wouldn't leave it like this. My father's bridge deserved to stand again, not as a monument of revenge, but of peace. Rebuilding. Over the next few months, I worked alone. Each morning, I hauled timber from the forest, measuring, cutting, and assembling planks in the same pattern my father had used. It wasn't easy. My hands bled, my back ached, and the weather fought me every step of the way. But slowly, piece by piece, the bridge returned. The HOA had gone silent. The resort was abandoned, its investors pulling out after losing millions. Douglas resigned quietly and moved away. A for sale sign stood at the entrance of their once grand gate, rusting in the rain. By summer, the bridge was finished. Not perfect, but real. Honest. Mine. I stood in the center one morning, the water calm and full beneath me. For the first time since this all began, I felt peace. No anger, no bitterness, just the quiet hum of wind and water. Then I noticed movement on the far shore. A young boy, maybe 12, stood watching me. He had a fishing rod in his hand and a shy smile on his face. "Can I try fishing here?" he asked, hesitant. "Of course," I said, smiling. "Just watch your step." He ran across the bridge. The wood creaked but held firm. He cast his line into the water, the ripples spreading out like rings of forgiveness. I sat down beside him. "Used to fish here with my dad," I said softly. He nodded. "My grandpa taught me too." We sat there for a while, neither speaking, both staring at the calm lake. The sun broke through the clouds, golden light spilling across the water. The reflection of the bridge shimmered, strong and steady. In that moment, I realized the truth. The lake, the dam, the bridge, they were never about ownership. They were about memory, about roots, about the quiet promise that no matter how much people destroy, some things can always be rebuilt. The final letter. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the county's Environmental Board. Mr. Hayes, after reviewing your work on the Clearwater Dam and the subsequent restoration of the lake ecosystem, the board has decided to officially recognize the Hayes family as the custodians of Clearwater Lake. Your cooperation in restoring balance is greatly appreciated. I folded the letter and looked out at the water. The bridge gleamed in the morning sun. Birds skimmed across the surface. Life had returned. For a long moment, I just stood there, hands in my pockets, wind on my face, and whispered a quiet thank you to the man who'd started it all. "Rest easy, Dad," I said. The bridge is back. Epilogue: The calm after the storm. Years passed, and the story of the drained lake became a local legend. People still talked about it. Some said it was revenge, others called it justice. But no one really knew the truth. Every so often, a new family would move into the area, drawn by the peaceful lake and the quiet charm of the old wooden bridge. They'd wave when they saw me tending the dam, not knowing the history beneath their feet. And I'd smile, because they didn't need to know. The past had already done its work. The water had taken what it needed, and given back what it could. Now, when I stand at the edge of the dam on still mornings, I can almost hear my father's voice again. Calm, steady, proud. "You're the keeper of the water now." And I finally understand what he meant. It was never about controlling the water. It was about respecting its power, and knowing when to let go.